You are for Business Focus on Politics and Business TV. My name is Maria Adozake. Debt usually arises when a government spends more than it collects in revenue. Debt itself is not necessarily bad. However, increasing debt levels can reduce per capita income and make society collectively poorer. But government debt plays a crucial role in financing public goods and services, responding to unexpected events and macroeconomic stabilization by allowing governments to manage the money supply, interest rates, and inflation. Nigeria's total public debt reached 87.91 trillion by the end of the third quarter of 2023. Details from the Debt Management Office (DMO) as against 87.38 trillion in the second quarter of 2023. Experts in the financial service sector have predicted a notable upward trajectory in Nigeria's total public debt following a modest increase of 0.61% quarter-on-quarter. Dated statistics from the NBS broke it further down to reveal that Nigeria's total debts stood at 31.98 trillion in third quarter 2023, while total domestic debt was 855.93 trillion. The debt figure is attributed to a decrease in the nation's external debt, dropping from $43.16 billion in June to $41.59 billion in September. However, there was a moderate increase of 1.80 trillion naira, 1.80 trillion naira in domestic debt. On Business Focus today, we'll be looking at Nigeria's debt profile. Let's begin with the equity market and after the break.
Hello there. Worried about complexities and dynamics of business in Nigeria? On Business Focus, we bring you insight from the forefront of industry innovation, business news, latest figures from the stock market with in-depth analysis and even market survey. Let's journey through the ever-evolving world of business and economics, where we decode the latest market moves and provide you with the knowledge to navigate the intricate web of business challenges. This is Business Focus.
Welcome back to Business Focus. We are going to look at the highest rates. That's the highest rates for today. And the highest rates for today, we have Transco as the top with 34 trades at the volume of 5,762 at the value of 53,589. We have Access Co coming next with 28 trades at the volume of 89,808 at the value of 2,070,000. WAPIC is third on the list with 11 trades at the volume of 16,834 at the value of 11,278. Let's look at the bottom loser, the top gainers for today. As of today, we have the top gainers as IMG. That's positive 10%, and we also have Transco at positive 10% and Okomo Oil at positive 9.96%. Let's look at the bottom losers for today. We have John Holt at negative 10%, Ella Lakes at negative 9.94%, and Triple G at negative 9.66%. Let's take a look now at the commodity top performer. We have nickel topping the list at positive 1.93%. We also have coming in closely EEX Strom Phoenix base load future at positive 1.47%. You also have lumber with positive 1.38%. Let's look at another commodity. Let's look at energy. Energy topping the list. For energy, we have natural gas, that's Henry Hub, at negative 4.02%. We have ethanol at positive 0.05%. We also have heating oil at positive 0.74%. Let's look at another commodity. We have industrial metals, and topping the list we have aluminium at positive 2.08%. We have lead at 5.44% positive, and iron ore at positive 0.34%. Let's look at the next commodity. We have agriculture. On agriculture, top in the list, we have cotton at positive 1.20%. We have oats at positive 0.68% and lumber at positive 1.35%. We have precious metals also on the commodity today. We have gold topping the list with positive 0.28% and palladium with negative 0.36% and platinum with positive 0.22%. And we have the Naira exchange rate as of close of market yesterday at 872 Naira per dollar at the official market, and at the unofficial market, the Naira sold at 1,233 per dollar. That's at the parallel market. We'll take a short break. We'll come back for the interview segment where we'll be discussing the debt profile of the country. You stay tuned. To look at the nation's debt profile, and to begin that, we are here with Mr. Wale Joshua to discuss that. Good morning, Mr. Wale Joshua. Welcome to Business Focus.
Good morning, and compliments of the season.
Compliments of the season, right back at you, sir.
Yes.
Welcome back. So we're going to be looking at the debt profile. So far, from my background, what's your assessment of the current situation, of the current debt situation in the country?
The debt profile of the country is really pathetic, because over the last 10 years, we've been running a deficit budget, which indicates that we've not been able to generate much revenue that will cover most of our expenses.
True.
Our needs are more than what we can produce, what we can generate. So we don't have any we did not have any option than to go for debt financing. So if you are going for debt financing, is it responsible debt financing? Is it good or not? That's the question. There is no bad side of going to borrow. The bad side of going to borrow, it's only the fact that borrowing and not being irresponsible and not being a responsible borrower. That's the only point that we need to guide against. And when we can guide against this, if we are responsible and we can monitor our debt level, I believe that we'll be better off it, because we're going to borrow to finance our infrastructure, borrow to finance most of our revenue generating structures. If we can borrow to do that, we are going to get it right. But if we borrow to finance our consumption, if we borrow to finance our indiscipline, if we borrow to finance most of non-physical projects, it will tell on the nation, and the effect is what we have currently. Because if you look at the debt to revenue, you know that it's not really encouraging. It's expected that over the 10 years, over the 20 years that we've been running a deficit budget finance, we should get to a point that the infrastructure in place would have been able to generate much revenue to cover up for debt. We should be at a rewind stage now. What I mean by rewind stage is that we should be at a point where our appetite for debt is reducing because of robust revenue we're generating from our infrastructure. So that's my own take.
Okay, so Mr. Wale Joshua, you mentioned that we should be borrowing to finance something that would also bring back a return.
Yes.
Instead, we are borrowing to finance our greed and our comfortable, luxurious life. So would you say that debt we have on ground, that's the 87 trillion we have on ground, would you say we have been borrowing it to service the good, that's the whatever would bring outcome, or just our greed?
Well, bringing up the greed, it's an aspect of is an aspect of the discussion, and bringing up the type of debt the debt mix, it's an aspect. To finance greed, take it or leave it, it's not good, because it will tell on our nation, it will tell on our economy, it will tell both in naira value and in foreign currency value. Now, what I mean by the debt mix is that what are we using our debt to finance? Are we using our debt mix to finance consumption? If you are using it to finance consumption, we can never gain anything from it. You can never have a return on that investment, because we just borrowing to squander. If we are borrowing to squander, that means we are borrowing to finance our wastes. That's not greed this time around, but our waste. If you are borrowing to finance our wastes, it will be very difficult to recoup. That means we have to double up our hustle to make sure that we cover up that gap. So if you are not going to generate revenue to cover up those gaps, that means we would not be better off in generating returns that will later cover up, that will later be used in repaying the debt. And the bottom line of any debt secured is the repayment. Even before you go to your creditors, the creditor will tell you, show me the template of your repayment, show me your repayment plan, and you may not be able to deviate from that, except you want to be credit unworthy.
Okay, so talking about being worthy and being unworthy, are we credit worthy? Are we, as a country, are we credit worthy?
As a country, we are still credit worthy.
Okay.
What our creditors do is to assess what the national revenue is, and they plug the debt service into the national revenue. That means you have to agree to a terms, and when you agree to that terms, you have to finance your debt based on that terms. Most of these terms agreed upon were based on national revenue, and that is why you see our revenue our debt to revenue ratio being too high. That's we have 73.5% debt to revenue ratio. That means before the country Nigeria will spend 1 naira, they must have used over 70 kobo to service their debt. And when they use over 70 kobo to service their debt, they are left with 30 kobo to finance all other 1 naira expenditure. So if you are going to use 30 kobo to finance 1 naira expenditure, you have to go and borrow. So if you are going to go and borrow, that means you have to keep mounting the level of debt you have. What the Nigerian nation is currently looking at is revenue coming from private sector. That's why Nigeria as a nation cannot do away with public-private partnership model, because much money is within the private sector. If you look at the revenue to GDP ratio, you see that's the tax revenue to GDP ratio. You see that it's very low. What this indicates is that most monies lies within the private sector. Okay. We have much money within the private sector. So if we are looking at the debt, we are looking at government debt. And if you are looking at government debt, we cannot do much on infrastructure using government funded monies. Otherwise, we go back to the private sector. So Nigeria can pull out itself from the cycle of much debt burden using the PPP method, because most money now lies with the private sector and not with the government sector. So if we are left with 30%, less than 30% to finance our infrastructure consumption, and even much salaries payments, personnel costs, it will be difficult for the government to shoulder that without going into debt. And you will recollect that as of sometimes in 2003, government decided that government doesn't have business in government, so they are throwing it back to the private sector in returns for taxation.
Government doesn't have business in business.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So talking about the public-private partnership, what would you say should be some policies put in place to make that stronger and more comfortable? Because You mentioned the most of the revenue actually comes from the private sector.
Well, what we are looking up to the government for within the private sector is that they should give us an enabling environment. Enabling environment in terms of their basic responsibility, which is security of life and property. Apart from security of lives and property, private sectors are providing much more of what they need. They're providing electricity, they're providing water, they're providing many other things to make sure that they sustain their business. The only thing they are forbidden to do in provisions for themselves is provision is carrying of arms. And this is where the security lies. If security lies, if the national security or national government forbids carrying of arms, they should be able to provide that security. If you have security of lives and properties, private sector can provide many other things they need. They can provide this needed infrastructure. I've seen communities providing road for themselves. I've seen estates providing even gas supplies for themselves. As domestic as gas supply is, as individual as gas supply is, some estates have been providing it for themselves. If this can be done within the private sector, what we're looking keenly to the government, to the hands of the government for is the security. If security can be provided, every other platform will be provided. I don't want to go into the infrastructure side, because if you go into the infrastructure side, what the response of government of today will be is, where do we fund it? And where do we fund it means that we still have to go back to this debt burden. So let's provide a good and secured environment first, then we see many other things coming in. We see people teaming up to provide many things that they need. We see people teaming up to provide this a long stretch of road that is motorable for their products, because that is where their profitability lies. And where their profitability lies, there goes their expenses. If their expenses will go into the provision of the infrastructure, let's provide the securities for them.
Okay, so Mr. Wale Joshua, let's talk about other countries. We have here that the United States, United Kingdom, Japan, China, and India have significant amount of national debts too, with the U.S. having the largest at $31.46 trillion. So for the fact that they are the ones that are developed, because you can call them developing, they're already developed, they're already there, and then they have that much debt, should Nigeria also not worry, or is there something, what's your assessment of that?
Well, when we compare Nigeria with other countries, we should compare with many other indices.
Okay.
We have the foreign reserve.
Okay.
US has the highest foreign reserve in this continent. So sorry, in the world economy.
Okay.
US has the largest foreign reserve. US has the lowest inflation rate. US has many other infrastructures in place. What I believe is driving United States debt is their military hardware, their quest for military hardware, and their technology. So those are the things taking much of their revenue.
Okay.
And when these things are in place, what they will reap in returns from the debt is much more from what Nigeria will reap in returns. So when we are comparing, we should look at what the returns will be like in US and what the returns will be like in Nigeria. Returns in Nigeria based on compared with the debt that we already incurred, it's not really encouraging. It's not really encouraging. What at the beginning of this discourse, I told you that the essence of taking debt is to ensure that we generate more revenue. If you don't generate more revenue, so what's the essence of taking that debt? The essence of other countries taking the debts are well known. And don't forget that these countries, US, UK, India, they still contribute to financing aids, financing grants, and financing even the so-called bilateral organizations that provide this loan. So they are better off in terms of their loan to revenue ratio. They are better off in terms of their loan to GDP ratio. They are better off in terms of their infrastructure to debt to debt ratio. If you look at the cost of their infrastructure, the cost associated with their infrastructure, you believe that the debt is just a fraction of their infrastructure. Come to Nigeria, you see that our debt is not commensurate with what we called our infrastructure. The last regime invested much on railway. So the only functioning railway as of today, which we invest over 6 years or 7 years into, is the Kaduna-Abuja Railway, Itakpe-Warri Railway, and the Lagos-Ibadan railway track. Others are still in progress, but with the speed of work as of then, one would expect that the railways will have encircled Nigeria, will have made transportation easier for the Nigerian populace.
True.
But that is not the case. That's one typical example of debt to infrastructure comparison. Debt to infrastructure comparison is nothing to be right home about. We use much money in providing infrastructure than it will have been obtainable in many other countries.
Okay, so thank you very much for that, Mr. Wale Joshua. We would go on a short break. When we come back, we'll discuss some relief programs like the Paris Club and whether Nigeria is still debt-worthy. You're still on to Politics and Business TV. Do stay tuned. Welcome back from that break. We are still talking about the debt profile of the country, Nigeria. Mr. Wale Joshua, so you mentioned that we're able to pay our debt to credit worthy, but the World Bank has decided it's not giving us any more of money. We cannot borrow from them anymore. So what's your thought on that?
It is the prerogative of any country, any institution to decide who and who is going to borrow from, or who is going to lend to. So if the World Bank says they are not going to lend to us, they are not going to borrow us money, we still have people, we still have other means of getting ourselves into more debts. Other means like sales of bonds. If we can sell our bonds outside the country, we are going to get foreign currency denominated debts. If we are going to approach many other countries which we have bilateral relationship with, we can borrow from them. We have other institutions. We have the African Development Bank. We have the IMF. We have many other institutions that can borrow Nigeria money. The effect of this is the fact that our credit ratings will be diminishing. Our credit rating, if the World Bank can decide that we are not going to borrow you funds again, they have their considerations. Maybe the usage of the fund is not in line with their own ethics. Maybe the usage of the fund is not in line to what they think Nigeria will need. If they feel Nigeria will need the fund, they will definitely borrow them. Probably we've exhausted our borrowing threshold with the World Bank. We still have many other countries we can borrow from. And apart from that, we are looking at the debt. World Bank is just one source of our debt portfolio. We can go domestic. If we can go domestic, we can borrow from the banks. We can borrow from many other institutions like the pension fund. We can borrow from the NSITF contributions. We can borrow from many other things, and then we can improve our productivities. And one internal sector of our nation. Apart from that, we are good to go in terms of debt financing, and this may not be the first time the federal government is getting this information from the World Bank. Maybe they've gotten that. Maybe they've gotten a lot of warnings to that, a lot of caution to our borrowing appetite. Maybe they've cautioned the federal government on that. Okay. So the federal government would have been looking elsewhere in terms of its borrowing plans, which I know and I believe that it will not affect the 2024 budget. And the whole essence of whether to borrow from IMF, whether to borrow from bilateral organizations or multilateral organization is that we need to finance our budget. If we are going to finance our budget, we have diverse sources where we can borrow from. And I believe that World Bank, though very significant, may not really have effect on our borrowing appetite. So we're looking for proactiveness from the government coffers to make sure that much other organizations are providing loans for us.
Okay, so Mr. Wale Joshua, we have 87 trillion in debt. We are 87 trillion in debt. So would you say we should go for relief programs like the Paris Club, or should we just try and pay them up?
Well, when we talk about relief program, when we talk about call for relief, debt relief or debt cancellation, okay, it comes with conditions. Have we met the conditions? We have to present a proposal to whoever we are seeking reliefs from. And if the proposals are accepted, they consider it, they come with their own terms and conditions. Sure. Because you have to let go of some things, of some other things. If you can fulfill the conditions, then we may be good to go. Debt cancellation is a factor of two entities, the borrower and the lender. If the lender can forgo, if the lender feels that he has recouped much more of the interest. What I mean by much more of the interest is that the interest itself has covered maybe times 2 of the principal sum. We kept financing the interest on the loan. They may want to forgive us. Okay. And if we